Well, hello and welcome. I am Guy Stevens, and this is AASR Live, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live video podcast series. I'm really excited to have you here today. We have a great show for you, as usual, at least as I like to think that, and we have some great conversation coming ahead. Those of you that may not be familiar with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, we are an organization that was formed almost 5 years ago. That's right, we're heading up to 5 years now. It's hard to believe. Time moves really quickly, but we've been around for about 5 years. We were started really with this work around the use of restraint and seclusion in schools around the country. Of course, that has grown into not only restraint and seclusion, but suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, all the punitive things that are often done to people, very often in the name of behavior. And of course, we know the people that are often more likely to be affected by these things, children with disabilities, Black and brown children, kids with a trauma history. So we do a lot of work around policies and laws and education, and really trying to advocate for change. So I'm excited as always because we have what I like to think are a lot of really amazing guests that join us, and today is no exception. We've got Daniel Hodges joining us today, and we're going to be talking to Daniel, who's an activist that is really doing a lot of work around disabilities and inclusion, and we've got a lot exciting to talk about there. So Daniel will be joining us here in just a moment. But before we get to Daniel, I just want to share with you a couple of things. One, if you are already watching live, and I know there's a few of you that have already tuned in, you know the drill here. Tell us in the chat who you are and tell us where you're from. It's always fun to see where people are joining us from today. And I really enjoy seeing we have many regular folks that join us on a regular basis. So it's always fun to see who happens to be on and with us. And, so let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. I do want to let you know a couple of housekeeping things. One, as always, these sessions are recorded. So this session will be recorded. You'll be able to go back and watch it later on YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. We also make it available as an audio-only podcast, so you can go back and listen on Spotify or iTunes Music or whatever it may be, wherever you listen to podcasts. We also have the transcripts that are available as well on our Buzzsprout page, so you can go back and listen to that as well. One of the announcements I had at our last event, and this is really exciting, this is part of our upcoming year, is that moving into this year, we actually have some help from some sponsors that are helping us to really cover kind of the cost and the expense of bringing this program to you. And we've got a couple of really kind of, I'd say, hand-picked sponsors that are going to be helping us out with bringing you these podcasts. And I'm really excited to introduce you to one of our first sponsors today and share with you a little bit about the sponsor. So one of our sponsors, and you got to actually meet them probably more than once, more than twice, a couple of times on our live events before, but Connie Persick is the owner of Supportable Solutions. And Supportable Solutions is one of the sponsors that is going to be sponsoring our podcast over this year. And I want to share with you kind of a brief clip here about a product that they're rolling out called the Y Toolkit. And the Y Toolkit is something that I'm really excited about. But let me share with you this clip and let you know a little bit more about what the Y Toolkit is. And of course, thank Supportable Solutions for supporting our work here.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Y Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Y Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study. Connie Persick has created leading-edge work as she has transformed the traditional behavior support plan and functional behavior assessment. The Y Toolkit, cutting-edge behavioral supports for the present day. Rethink, reframe, reimagine. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
For supporting our work here with the podcast. Connie is a friend and a colleague and someone that's doing a lot of amazing work. You probably saw in that brief little clip there the quotes from other Alliance supporters like Mona De La Hook and Lori Desautel's. This is really great work. I do want to mention to you one other sponsor that we have that is helping us out is a sponsor that has helped to produce a book here. And this book, the sponsor is Robert Delana and Ryan Delana, and they wrote together this amazing book called Without Restraint. And Without Restraint is really the story of Ryan's, unfortunately, Ryan's experience in school, being restrained and secluded and really misunderstood and having a lot of challenges that really were difficult for he and his family. As I read this book, there was so much of it that I could relate to. But what's really beautiful about the book is that the book is a story about how through these challenges that at one point Robert took his son skiing, and skiing became an activity that Ryan began to excel in and really ended up changing his life. And Ryan now is in college and doing some amazing things. And I'll share with you next time some of his social media and some of the things he does. But it's a fantastic book. I actually have a couple of free copies of this book as well. And if you will comment on this, that you are interested in a book, I will give away a book today. So if you're interested in a book, put a comment in, tell me you're interested in a book, and maybe we can send you one today. But I do want to thank Ryan and Robert for helping to sponsor our podcast as well. Really appreciate the work that they're doing. So now on to our show, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce to you our special guest here today. We've got Daniel Hodges joining us, and Daniel is an activist dedicated to assisting others with disabilities and chronic illness reach their full potential. And while in law school, Daniel founded Pieces of Me, which is a nonprofit foundation, and it promotes universal access and inclusion. Daniel's perspective has been shaped by his experience as a blind man with chronic pain and other conditions, and he spent a lifetime surpassing the low expectations placed before him, and his personal calling is to help others do the same. Daniel, I'm really excited to have you here today. You and I have had the opportunity to have some conversations in the past, and I was really just really excited about the opportunity to talk with you and learn more about you and learn about the work that you're doing. And you and I had talked about kind of in this session, kind of talking about designing an environment for everyone. So this idea of kind of inclusion and how do we design better environments for everyone? So let me just start with saying, Daniel, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, and thank you for taking time to meet with our community.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm glad we're finally having a chance to have this conversation.
Yeah, it seems like we actually booked this some time ago, and I guess it's one of those things that in fact we're still kind of in the same situation where through this work, I have the opportunity to meet a lot of amazing people doing incredible work that is making a difference. And, that usually leads this conversation. And much like our conversation where I'm like, well, Daniel, I've got to have you on my podcast sometime. I'd love to have you join me on Alliance Live. And then we get to booking and I'm like, oh gosh, we're already booked out almost a year in advance. We are actually, I think, already fully booked for 2024. So this leaves me sometimes even adding some special events in because there's so much out there, and we do these for, I think a couple of reasons. One, I think that sharing our stories and sharing our journeys is really important. And the other is, how do we share and inspire others? How do we show the way that others have forged and really hopefully support change. So really excited to have you here today. I do want to let you know that we do have some folks that have already jumped in and said hello, and I'll just share a couple of those with you real quickly. If you haven't said hello yet in the chat, please do. Tell us who you are and where you're from. But Daniel, let me share a couple of these hellos with you. We have Aaron here, a parent and special educator from Delaware. And I will make the point here, and I'll make it because I see I have the next one queued up. We have people from around the world that join these live events that we do. And it always amazes me because we have people from Australia and New Zealand and United Kingdom and all over the world. And in fact, The next comment here, Marianne, is Happy New Year from Australia, and we've got a couple kangaroos there as well. Thank you as always. So it's great to know, and of course it's already tomorrow. It's already Friday morning in Australia, so people are getting up early to listen to you. I've got Erica here from Indiana that's joining us. Let's see, and Sandra from Wilmington, North Carolina. Others, if you're joining now, again, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. So, Daniel, let's get started. I told you, I said we're going to have a conversation. We're gonna have a talk, and really what I want to be able to do is kind of share a bit more about kind of who you are, the work that you've been doing, the things you believe. So why don't we start out? I gave you a very brief introduction, but would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey? Who is Daniel Hodges, and how did you get to kind of where you are and the things that are important to you?
Absolutely. And, one of the reasons we connected back in, I think it was 2019, was, we had this common, we have this common belief that we could be proactive and mitigate so many of these unnecessary and harmful interventions that occur, as you said, one of the most highly impacted groups are kids with disabilities and other differences. And, I didn't grow up in a situation where I was restrained or secluded in a sense, but I grew up as a kid with a serious visual impairment, legal blindness, and was not put in the position to succeed. I remember having some level of accommodations, kindergarten, first grade, and homeschool, second grade, third grade. When we moved to Idaho the first time, that was the first time that I experienced bullying. That was not only by the kids, but just complete apathy from the school staff, including my teacher, who basically said, well, everybody's supposed to be copying the sentence that's on the chalkboard. If I remember to read it out to you, great. If not, it's your problem.
Wow.
Attitude. And that kind of thing started to compound, and I was able to make it through 4th through 6th grade back in Ohio with fortunately more supportive staff, and started to be able to build some rapport with my fellow students, at least a couple of them. And then for reasons kind of beyond the scope here, my parents ran into a kind of an impasse with the local school district, who wasn't, we're talking a rural school district in Ohio, who wasn't prepared to put in the right kind of accommodations for a kid with vision loss. And I ended up missing all of 7th, all of 8th, almost all of 9th, all of 10th, and all of 11th, with a handful of homeschool lessons mixed in. And it wasn't until 12th grade where I finally was introduced to a school for the blind, again, actually back in Idaho. I bounced around a little, and that was a few months shy of my 18th birthday. First time I'd ever been introduced to a white cane, first time I'd ever been introduced to Braille, first time I'd ever been introduced to access technology. And the funny thing was, you start getting these things down to where I'm learning Braille, I'm learning how to use these other computer tools that teach me to rely on something other than what's left of my vision. And I went from where I had previously struggled to get C's and B's to getting pretty much straight A's, because the access was there. But even still, I had a lot of trauma that I took on. I had a lot of self-doubt that I took on. I had internalized that I was struggling and wasn't able to keep up with my peers. And instead of recognizing that it was the system who was failing, I started to believe that, well, maybe I'm just not smart enough. Maybe I'm just not able to succeed. And, then you had some things that went on in college life they really it really set me up to a point where um, when I finally realized in adulthood, oh hey, I actually am kind of smart, and was able to get into law school, it really positioned me to be able to say, look, I somehow made it through here. I was very blessed in making it to this place, and I have a strong desire to give back. I recognize that with my chronic illness and some other things, I have to work with my body rather than against it. And so that was kind of the impetus for starting Pieces of Me with my cousin while I was in law school, and finding ways to continue to contribute and um, make it to where hopefully other kids won't experience the same kind of hurdles that I did, while also being realistic with my capabilities and designing my own path to success that works with my circumstances rather than against them.
Hmm. So, yeah, first of all, I have to say, you said you realized you were kind of smart, and I would say you're going through law school. You passed that ramp, and we're certainly proving yourself. But I mean, this kind of scenario plays out today with so many kids that are not neurotypical, or they have a disability, or they have a trauma background. And I'm sure that as you reflect on your own experience, and an experience that no doubt was quite traumatic for you, I'm sure it's pretty upsetting and disappointing to realize, like, wow, we haven't made the progress that we really need to make, and that these things are still happening so often to so many. So this is a journey that I'm sure was really difficult, and it's always painful to hear things that people say, hear actual things that people say to kids. The comment you mentioned about, like, well, hey, I might read it out if I think about it. I mean, it just amazes me sometimes. Why do you think that happens? I mean, why do you think? I mean, it almost seems, when you reflect on some of the things that we see happen to kids, and listening to your story, you wonder, like, how does this happen? How does a system get to the point where people seem to have such little empathy for those that are different or have different needs? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that? Because I mean, it's not a problem. I mean, I wish it was. I wish, Daniel, was a problem that has gone away, but it's not. Why do you think that is?
When I was doing research for my thesis project for my bachelor's in education, something that really stood out to me was, as I looked through the research at the time in 2015 related to twice exceptionality. So that dual reality of needing special education services on some level, but also being gifted and talented. The research on twice exceptionality was extremely limited. And when you try to dig a little deeper for looking at twice exceptionality for individuals who have a sensory or physical disability, but are also in the gifted and talented range, that research at the time was literally non-existent. There was nothing. And so we end up with, I think, a self-perpetuating cycle of expecting that people with disabilities, whether they be intellectual, developmental, physical, or sensory, that we're going to be in the bottom 20, in the bottom quartile of students. And it's studied in that, through that framework. And then once that begins to be the pattern, that it kind of self-perpetuates into, we study what we expect to see, and we expect to see what we study. And so there's a real problem in our self-concept as a society, where we don't stop to say, wait a minute, this person with ADHD or blindness or some combination of any number of factors may also happen to be brilliant. And until we stop to look at the entire student and really ask ourselves what each individual is capable of, with the right supports in place, we end up mitigating things and almost becoming suppressors in a sense, rather than giving students of all kinds and of all kinds of situations and circumstances the tools they need to succeed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting. You brought up that idea of choice exceptional. I mean, I will tell you from this work that we do related to a lot of the punitive things, a lot of the restraint, seclusion, other things that are done to kids. There is a huge intersection there. I would say with kids that are or are identified as choice exceptional, being restrained and secluded, and I think. Some of that comes from, I think there's a lot of things that contribute to it. I mean, one thing is it's this prevalence, and I'll let you jump in on this as well. I imagine we're probably on a similar vein on this, but if we're not, then I'm ready to learn from you. But I mean, even going back to kind of like the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability, kind of medical model focusing on deficits and what's wrong with somebody and how do we fix people, to a social model of how do we remove barriers in the environment, how do we better accommodate people's needs. I think we live in a world that is very deficit driven and is often, looking at what's wrong with people or looking at people as being broken or puzzles to solve or whatever it may be. And that's the wrong mindset. There's that tendency to, especially if we look among kind of the neurodivergent population, to, hold everybody to a neurotypical standard and have expectations that are based on things that, really just don't make sense. I mean, I've experienced it with my son, but I see it with so many people where there's expectations that are put on people that are ableists, that are coming from directions that are really harmful. So, I mean, do you think that's a part of it? Is kind of that mindset?
Absolutely, and I think that mindset even exists to some degree within the advocacy movement, because when we start talking about having the right supports in place as in a sense of equity, or in a sense of making sure that people are not mistreated. That's true. But that's only part of it. The other part is not just looking at the deficits of, well, let's remove the restraints, let's remove the roadblocks. Let's go beyond that and say, let's empower each student to live out their full potential. And it may seem like semantics, but by turning it into a positive framework, what we're then able to say is, it's not just for us. It's not just for people like myself who grew up with a serious uphill climb. It's about the people that I and your son and others who go through these things. Once we have those hurdles removed, what we can do to give back to the world around us. And so we start talking about investment in people rather than what is almost still a charity model, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. No, absolutely, absolutely. So you shared something as you were kind of running through some of your story, and I'm going to say I don't know if I knew this or I don't know if I remembered this, because at my age sometimes I know things that I don't remember. But you mentioned, because I knew of course that you had gone through law school, but you mentioned kind of your undergrad in education, and given the experience that you had in the education system, one that was, really not appropriately meeting your needs, not appropriately supporting you, what drove you to education? What was that experience like for you?
It was interesting. I settled on education because it was what I thought was my best option given my circumstances. So on one hand, I thought I could be a change maker, and I thought I could bring a different kind of learning environment to my students. And to the degree that I did as a student teacher, I think I succeeded in that. But, the fascinating thing about it is it took me an additional, few years after graduation before it really sank in that I could do whatever I wanted to do rather than choosing a degree that I knew blind people were commonly in, or people with chronic pain were commonly in. So it's kind of a mixed bag for an answer there.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's interesting though, that, you know, in part because of the experience that you had, and in part because of the expectations that seem to be pervasive in the world, you made a decision that was limiting to yourself, because that's what was, it reminds me of that idea of, what is it, the Pygmalion effect, this idea that, our thoughts influence our actions can then influence other people's thoughts, and that their thoughts can then, influence their actions. A very classic example where, I think it's so important. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I don't remember which one it was, but they were talking about how the little things we say, and it was in the context of parents, but it could be a parent, a teacher, or anyone, but the little things we say that stick with people. And we all can probably think about things that, our parents or a teacher or someone said to us at one point, but they really can make a deep impact. But you got to a point where you reflected on that, and you came to this idea that I can do whatever I want. And that led you to law school. I mean, is that what happened next? What happened after your undergrad? You decide not to go into teaching, and how did you end up taking that next step?
So what happened was, about halfway through my student teaching placement, the actual placement fell through, partly because, there were some struggles there, some things I probably could have controlled better that I didn't, but mostly because I was in a district where the host teacher, the principal, the placement supervisor were really struggling with the idea of how can someone like me keep eighth graders engaged, even though I had succeeded in doing that. There was, well, this particular crop of eighth graders happens to be really amenable. If you would have had last year's eighth graders, it would have been different. All those sorts of things. And eventually it just came to a head where the university said, okay, look, the student teaching placement has fallen through. Either we can replace you in a future cohort, or we can offer you an alternative degree, which ended up being educational studies. And I made it through that. I pivoted and said, okay, I can survive this, because I'd survived so many other things in my post-secondary life. But 2 years after graduation, I found myself still unemployed. I was a couple months post-divorce in 2017. I was a couple months into my recovery from a major hip and femur surgery. I was at the tail end of some of the worst anxiety. I had a week where I had some of the worst anxiety attacks I'd ever had in my life, just one on one, just one after the other. And at the tail end of this, my mentor, through a program I was part of at the time, came to me and she said, I've really been thinking about this, and you're smart, you're a great advocate, you have all these different tools that you can use. Why wouldn't you why wouldn't you consider going to law school? And I said, I don't know about the accessibility of it. I don't know about the pain. I don't know about my study skills. And am I really smart enough to do it? Can I afford it? All of these other things. And then 48 hours later, a mentor who had actually been with me through the entire ride in my undergrad came to me. She had never met this other person, just totally disconnected. And she basically said almost verbatim the same thing. I've been thinking about this. You've got all these things going for you. Why wouldn't you consider going to law school? And I'll share a little personally here. I said, okay, I don't believe in coincidences, especially to this degree. So I prayed about it, found myself looking into it. I said, okay, if I can get financial assistance for the LSAT, if I can make some of these other things work, I'm at least going to give it a try. And door after door after door opened, despite having to fight with Voc Rehab for getting funding, despite, having to move from Missouri to Maryland and not having everything in place when I moved, which was an adventure. I was starting at University of Baltimore with a scholarship about a year, almost exactly a year to the day after these mentors had both come and challenged me. And I'll tell you, Guy, all of the things that I was afraid of, the pain, the mental health, the accessibility, the finances, the study skills, those are all real. And every single one of them manifested while I was there. It's not that the struggle was real, but at the same time, there were a host of other benefits that came. I found a way to get through the accessibility hurdles. I found a way to manage the pain enough to get through. I actually had two foot surgeries while I was in law school. I had to deal with COVID multiple times. None of us saw that coming, but it happened. And through all of those things, I came away saying, okay, if we understand that even when worst case scenario happens, we can still find a way through, what can I then take from that to try to add to the conversation and maybe help other people go through a process that I learned about called fear setting, where you actually see, okay, what's worst case scenario? Now, how do I get out of it? And that's partly what led me to this place and how all of these different components of my story tie together.
So you completed law school, and I want to get into talking about the Pieces of Me Foundation. But what came next? What came next? I mean, and this was when did you finish law school?
So I graduated in May of 2021, and
Okay.
By that point, we had incorporated Pieces of Me in the summer of 2020. Our official incorporation date is actually April 25th of 2020, which is the best time to start anything. And the following winter, we received our 501c3 designation, and so for the last 2.5 years, it's been some odd jobs, but a lot of building up the organization, trying to advance the conversation through that, and then also work as a consultant and speaker to just say, okay, look, so much of what we deal with as far as inaccessibility and stigma are based on fear, and oftentimes the fear is the fear to even engage in the conversation because we don't want to say or do the wrong thing. So if you ask me what I do, at the very root, it is trying to bring people to the table and say, look, I know this can feel like a minefield of a topic, but let me open a space where we can sit down and talk as humans. You don't have to be guarded. You don't have to mince words. Just tell me what your fears are. Ask me the questions you have. Tell me what your concerns are, and then we're gonna find a common foundation and build from there. So that's really the work I try to do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. So what is Pieces of Me? I mean, what is the foundation? What's the why did you start it? What's the purpose of the foundation? And I hear you on kind of what you do on a daily basis, but what is the foundation? What give me the elevator pitch of kind of like, this is what Pieces of Me is, and this is what we do.
So our brand new vision statement is we are transforming society's understanding of disability and chronic illness so that all individuals have the opportunity to reach their full potential. What that means is we're bringing people in for these conversations, and we're also using as a basis for these conversations, we're in the process of unveiling a really innovative tool where we are asking people to share the resources, the tips, the tricks that they find useful in their everyday lives into a database that is crowdsourced, that, of course, vetted, but crowdsourced and publicly available so that if you're a parent and you want to know what do other parents do in my shoes, you don't have to rely on a social worker or a doctor. You can come and you can find information that other parents who deal with who are experiencing dealing with what you're dealing with right now, they've got the information you need right now readily available to you. And as we build this database, better data makes better narrative, it makes better conversation, it makes better results. So that's to me how we build this back up.
So, who, so kind of understanding what your goal is and what you're doing, who are, it sounds like a lot of the work is based around kind of education work, right? Trying to educate people, but who's the who of like, who are you trying to target, or are there, you mentioned parents as an example. Are there other, do you target educators, or do you target other groups of people? Who is the who that are coming to Pieces to Me, and who are you serving?
Definitely, your parents, your educators. I'll also say employers.
Hmm.
People who are either new to disability or curious about it, who want a place where they can go to either find the answer that they currently need, or maybe in a broader sense, are interested in learning about the world that we live in, but just don't know where the on-ramp is.
So, so what I look at in terms of like, and I just had your website up there for a minute as we were talking about this, but as a potential service that somebody could consult with the organization. So if I'm an employer and I'm trying to better navigate supporting my workforce with disabilities, is there kind of a service or they're able to consult with you, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that are available through Pieces.
Okay.
There's an even broader array of service offerings that I offer through my own private consulting work. So, kind of stepping outside of the organization, and that could be anything from bringing people in who can help with either physical or digital accessibility. That can be cultural accessibility. That can be, like you said, an employer who comes and says, hey, I want to be able to hire and retain employees with disabilities, but I don't know where to start, and I don't want to get sued. To that, I would say, book a time on my calendar, get a free 30-minute consult where I can hear your questions, give you some support, and then we'll build a relationship from there. Because at the end of the day, I kind of feel like if we're wanting to see these seismic results either in education or employment or healthcare, that's going to require those of us who have some of the background that you and I have to sit down and say, okay, I recognize you can't just Google this. It's not that easy. Let's talk about this. Let me hear where you're at and let me build on it. And by the end of the conversation, you're going to feel more empowered. You're going to feel a heck of a lot less scared about it. And I think you're going to be excited about the prospects, because it's going to be much less mysterious and a lot more invigorating.
Gotcha. So, people can come to Pieces of Me and they can learn more, and there's resources there, but they can also hire you if they're interested in hiring a consultant to help them to understand and do better. I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? So you're kind of available to hire for consulting. Is that right?
Absolutely. And what I tell people is, look, obviously I've got bills to pay like everybody else. And Pieces of Me is a purely voluntary effort I make. I don't receive a dime in salary or anything else. So that's why I have both the consulting and the nonprofit side, and that's a real thing. But I never want inability to pay or lack of a budget to be a hurdle either. So, because at the end of this, I just want to see doors open. I want to see opportunity manifest because, you know, the potential to make a difference, even for somebody that I've never met, may never meet. Sometimes, sometimes that's what's required for me to either get out of an anxious spell or a depressive spell, or those moments where I have a joint that just won't work and it's painful and I can barely walk, all of those things. I can focus my attention on saying, you know, look, I can make a difference for somebody else today, and that's how I manage my physical and mental health. So I guess I bring that up to say, you know, yeah, all of these options are great. Some options work better for some than others. So here's the full menu and why I do what I do.
So Daniel, we might have had a brief internet hiccup there. I noticed that I lost video there for a second and sound, so I don't know if our audience did as well. So we might have lost a little bit of that last statement that you made. So I don't know if you want to summarize that last sentence or two a little bit for us again. I apologize about that. I just want to make sure that people heard kind of what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what I was just saying is, you know, yeah, I've got my own needs I've got to meet, and, you know, but to me, making a difference it's medicine for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
my ability to compartmentalize my own struggles by serving others. So, you know, I that's why I present the menu of options the way I do, and that's my why in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to transition in a second, but before I transition, so you completed law school, correct?
Correct.
And are you doing anything in terms of legal work now? Are you doing any kind of legal representation or civil rights or work or any of that? What's the status of kind of your legal efforts?
So I have not sat for the bar at this time.
Okay.
And, you know, the long and the short of it is just due to chronic pain concerns and some things like that, it just hasn't been the right time yet. And that may change at some point in the future. But right now, I do what you would call more of the macro work, being, you know, the broader advocacy as opposed to individual representation.
Gotcha. It's great. So I wanted to transition a little bit. So when we talked about this conversation, one of the things we talked about was this idea of kind of designing an environment for everyone. And you know, we talked about, oh, well, is that a presentation? Is it a discussion? Of course, we've been kind of building a discussion here, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about, you know, that idea of designing an environment for everyone. What does that mean to you? And what do we need to do to move in the direction of designing an environment for everyone? And before you answer, I just want to let people know that are watching live now, two things. One, if you haven't already, let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat. I see a few more people joined us here. I see Rosalie joined us here from Colorado. A couple other folks, let's see, Christy from Seattle. So a couple other folks have said hello, and it's always great to see you. So if you are just joining us, let us know who you are in the chat and where you're from. And if you have questions or comments for Daniel, feel free to put those in the chat as well. I'll be keeping an eye on those. So we'll have an opportunity to answer some of those questions or address some of those comments that you might have in the chat. So with that, let me hit it back to you, Daniel, and let you kind of take it away with that idea of, you know, what does it mean to design an environment for everyone?
So the really high level answer to that is we start by reframing the idea rather than saying we're building, rather than expecting people to conform to whatever environment they happen to be in. We flip that script and we say, wait a minute, environments are supposed to be designed for humans. And if the environment's not serving the people, then it's not the people's fault, it's the environment. And so, you know, when you drill down a little bit deeper, you say, okay, if we can understand that difference is normal, and if we can say that there are many different ways to fully enjoy and thrive in a given setting rather than just the one or two that may have originally been designed into the process, then we can start mitigating some of these things, you know, like lack of accommodations or seclusion or restraint. All of these things come back to design failures, not people failures.
Mm-hmm. And what would your priorities be if you're and I hear you, and I love the example you gave, and of course, as you were talking about environment, I pictured a graphic that I've seen many times that always resonates with me, and it's that graphic with the picture of kind of a flower growing and saying something to the effect of when a flower doesn't grow, you don't blame the flower, right? You change the environment. But so often our focus is on changing the individual rather than changing the environment and providing people what they need to be successful. So anyway, that resonated with me, what you were saying there. But I want to kind of take it in a direction of a question. A lot of the work that we do, a lot of it's around education. A lot of it's around, individuals with disabilities, individuals with trauma history, individuals that aren't having their needs appropriately met. And I probably shared this with you before, but when I see a kid that's being restrained or secluded or even suspended or expelled, what I very often see is someone whose needs we failed to understand and meet. And that can be a number of things. Sometimes it's environmental, sometimes it's other accommodations or services that might be necessary. But kind of back to that thought of, kind of this idea of designing an environment for everyone. In your mind, if you had, I'll give you the magic wand question, right? If you had a magic wand, and just believe in magic for me for a second, what would you change in our schools or in our education system to better design an environment for everyone?
I would eradicate this belief that educators have the psychic ability to determine what their students are capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that knowing that even in the school for the blind where I thrived, if you would have given even the teachers there a truth serum and asked them, how far do you think Daniel can go? Most of them would have said, not past graduation or into college. I don't think any of them would have envisioned me making it to law school, let alone finishing it. And so I know I'm not the exception there. And our actions follow our beliefs. And if we feel, if we have, educational processes in place that predict a limited potential to begin with, then we position ourselves to grossly underestimate the harm that is being done, not only to these students, but to the potential opportunities that they have to fully engage in society and contribute back into the system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the things I've been talking about a bit lately is kind of the idea of systemic trauma, and specifically as it relates to kind of the idea of systems of care. And when I'm talking about systems of care, I can be talking about a medical setting or a school. And there's often a very big blind spot to even the concept that systems of care can cause trauma. But unfortunately, it often is the reality. It's often the truth. And some of it starts with what you're talking about in terms of like the expectations that people have. Some of it starts around, kind of the model that people use in the way they view other people. But these systems and individuals and individuals that might be doing the things they're doing for very good reasons that want to help people. But this is a possibility. Systemic trauma is very real, and we know that the systems that are in place, whether it be kind of the way people look at behavior, the way they view disability, the punitive approaches that are taken, all of these things can lead to significant trauma. And you've got a story that follows kind of a story arc that there's a really good story there in terms of like this realization that you have and this idea that you can do anything you want. But I mean, I'm going to guess here, Daniel, and you can tell me about what your thoughts are. But for every Daniel out there's a lot of people that never have that moment of clarity, or that those two coincidental conversations, or whatever it may have been, that may become, they may become a self-fulfilling prophecy, these low expectations that happen to people. And what we know, of course, looking at the issues we look at, restraint, seclusion, suspension, these are kids that are far more likely to end up in our criminal justice system and really have poor outcomes. So it seems like there's so much to consider here. And again, your intent is important. People's intent is important, but are your actions lining up with your intent? How do we move people in a better direction? How do we move people that see themselves as helpers, want to help people, but may inadvertently be leading to systemic trauma for kids with disabilities, kids with trauma backgrounds?
Absolutely, and I would even add to your point. Not only are there many others who don't find the opportunities I did, who are kind of left in a less desirable situation, but there are many others, including myself, but more some to a greater degree, who are actively discouraged from finding their limits. And the way that we fix that, kind of tying back to your point about intent, is we stop blaming the potential allies or supporters who, as you said, have the best of intentions, and maybe the intent doesn't align with the action. And I wrote something last summer called "The Role of Forgiveness in Advocacy Work," and really focused on that point of saying, I can forgive the individuals who, in their own way, actively discouraged from trying to find my outer limits. And I've done the work to forgive them without going and trying to forget it, because it's still happening today. And so we have to meet people where they are, and very kindly, such an emphasis on the word kindly here, and empathetically say, look, I know you've got great intentions, and I know with all of the various noise out there, you may feel like somebody's here to sue you or deride you or whatever, but really, we're here to learn with you. And that also comes back to the advocates too. I don't have every answer. I'm learning from the people I engage with and saying, okay, you have this concern. I never knew that. I can now bake this into my education because I've got more clarity. And so you start creating reciprocity of learning, and you start saying, okay, you're learning from me about my experience and what was helpful to me. I'm learning from you about what led you to the assumptions that led to some of these harmful patterns. And by discussing and creating that reciprocity of learning, we're actually breaking the patterns one by one, and we're building bridges along the way. To me, that's the only way we do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said a lot there that I think is really important, and it reminds me, we often talk about there's some great work out there, people doing things that I think are really impactful. Ross Greene, who's known for his work on collaborative proactive solutions, has a very simple saying that says, kids do well if they can. And the idea, of course, being that, very often people look at behavior, think it's intentional. In fact, it's often a matter of skill or ability or, the access to the things that someone needs to be able to accomplish something. But there's a tendency to look at things as being intentional. And the same holds true with adults, whether they're teachers or parents or others. I think we all do well when we can. And sometimes, I think that recommendation you have to approach things with empathy is really important, because it is easy to be upset and mad and angry because, we might not feel that kids are being given what they should be given, or, being treated in the way that they should. But there is often more below the surface. And when you're able to collaborate with people, all people, I think you're far better off in getting favorable outcomes. So anyway, I think that's a really great point. Do you or have you done, or are you open to doing? Have you done consulting for schools or universities or others that are again kind of grappling with some of these issues about how they do better? Do you do anything in that vein?
I do, and I'll even I've done some work with administration. I even went back at the end of 2022 and did an open forum with some of the faculty and admin for University of Baltimore.
Mm.
A great conversation, and it led to me going in a few months later and doing a class on um, disability. Well, we call it disability etiquette, but really how to serve clients and colleagues with disabilities in the Veterans Advocacy Clinic, and it was a great conversation. I've done similar work with individuals who are looking to do healthcare and the law.
Mm.
And, you know, on the healthcare side, you mentioned earlier about trust and, some of these other things in the healthcare setting, and it's so true there as well. Um, Learning as an advocate to have the self awareness to say, I have been severely harmed by the medical sector in my life personally, and maybe even more so with some loved ones whom I've been kind of helplessly standing around as they were harmed and in some severe cases even abused. And I take that with me, but at the same time, when I go to see a doctor, I have to consciously take a step back and say, okay, I've got real trauma here. It's not going away. But this doctor, this nurse, this social worker in front of me, they didn't do it. I'm starting off with a clean slate with them, and hopefully I can break the pattern with the lessons I've learned. And so this all ties back to my recommendation for whether it's healthcare workers, whether it's lawyers, whether it's educators, business leaders. If you understand that the process of making it through as a person with a disability leaves a tremendous amount of scarring due to systemic inaccessibility and systemic ableism. If you understand that, and if we teach each other how to recognize the signs of trauma that sometimes manifest as feeling like they're somebody's less approachable, if we could start to teach that and teach over communication, then that allows for that trust to build back in among both parties, and it leads us to that safe place where we can create the reciprocity I was talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this really can be a process. I mean, this isn't just a simple thing, and it sounds like from what you're saying, like there's parts of this on all of us. It's not just a matter of one party having to fix something, but it's a process. Yeah, that's great. So I just want to pause here for a second and let people know that are watching live two things. One, again, if you have any questions or comments for Daniel, feel free to put those in the chat. I do want to take a moment and just remind people that I have a free book. And if somebody's interested in a free book, this is Without Restraint, the book that we talked about at the top of the show here. I have a free book to send out to somebody. So let me know in the chat you're interested, and we can send you one out. So, kind of as we begin to wrap things up here, what are and I think you just gave us one, but do you have other high level recommendations, in terms of, starting this work? Let's imagine for a second, for sake of argument, somebody is at the acknowledgement point, right? And they're like, you know what? We can do better. And I happen to be a big proponent of this idea. Like, if we can do better, we need to do better. But sometimes it's a journey even to get somebody to realize that, because again, sometimes our intentions blind us to realizing that we're doing things that might not be doing the best that we can. But what would some of your other advice be for people that are kind of beginning to go on this journey, realizing that, realizing that perhaps that they can do better? Anything immediately that comes to mind?
First thing, give yourself grace. We all have made mistakes. We all will make mistakes. And so allowing for those mistakes to be in the air without shame, without guilt, without blame, and just saying, okay, we're all on a process to doing better and letting it go. That's that's the rock that everything else is built on. Beyond that, understanding that as much as we might love to wave a magic wand, pass a law, do something that fixes this overnight, we're not there. Progress, real, sustainable, lasting progress, is incremental. It's slow. It's sometimes tedious, but that's how you get to where we're going, and that includes connecting individually one by one. Um, you know, that includes being able to meet each individual that we come across where they are and allow them to meet us where we are and build trust and empathy from that place, because once that is gained, it becomes self-perpetuating, and we have yet to even scratch the surface of what we can accomplish by implementing those very small and simple but profound changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This conversation has reminded me of why I enjoyed talking to you so much when we first had an opportunity to connect, and really glad to have you joining us today and sharing some of your story, your thoughts, and your wisdom. So really appreciate that. Just want to kind of give you an opportunity as we're wrapping up here. Do you have any final thoughts or final words you want to share with our audience here as they think about, and we've talked a bit about, how we can design an environment for everyone. Any final thoughts in that vein?
Um, my my final pitch is kindness moves mountains, and that all ties back to, if we can lower the temperature and connect as humans, we're going to get a lot further. And with regard to improving the processes, that really comes down to making sure that we're expanding beyond our own consciousness and beyond our own biases in finding out what other people are experiencing, so that we can create a much greater comprehensive level of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate you making the time out of your day to spend with us. And I know as we started the show, I had you still in Baltimore in my head, and I know you're no longer in Baltimore. But it's great to have you joining us today, and I appreciate you sharing your story, sharing your thoughts. I would encourage people to again visit the website, Pieces of Me. Encourage people. We included a link to your LinkedIn as well in the chat. And if people are interested in connecting or talking to you about their work, I would encourage them to do that as well. So again, I just want to thank you for your time today. You can hang around for a second. We're going to say goodbye to everybody else, and I'll have one last word for you. But thank you, everyone that's been watching here today. Appreciate you joining us, and appreciate you being part of the show. I do want to thank our sponsors again, Sportable Solutions, and also Without Restraint. Thank you for helping to make this possible. And we will see you again next time. So with that, we are out of here.